The station had no name anymore. The sign above the cracked archway had long ago rusted into an unreadable smear, its letters eaten by time and rain. People in the nearby village simply called it the old place, and they avoided it after sunset. Not because of superstition, they would insist, but because nothing good ever came from going there at night. And yet, on a cold autumn evening, Daniel found himself standing before it, breath fogging in the air, heart beating with a mixture of curiosity and unease. He had missed the last bus home, and the shortcut through the woods had brought him here. The tracks stretched into darkness on both sides like black veins disappearing into the earth. The station itself leaned slightly, as if tired of standing, its windows hollow and broken like empty eyes. A single bench remained on the platform, its wood warped and damp. Daniel checked his phone. No signal, no battery left. He sighed and stepped under the archway. The air inside was colder, unnaturally so, like walking into a cellar filled with unseen ice. The silence was thick, pressing against his ears, broken only by the faint creak of old wood shifting somewhere above. He told himself it was just the wind, even though the trees outside were perfectly still. He moved further in. The waiting room still had remnants of its past. A ticket counter with shattered glass, a faded timetable pinned crookedly to the wall, and a clock that had stopped at 2:17. His footsteps echoed too loudly, as if the room were much larger than it appeared. He sat on the bench, trying to calm himself. "Just wait until morning," he muttered. "It's nothing." Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time felt strange there, stretching and compressing like a living thing. Then he heard it, a faint sound at first, distant and almost indistinguishable from the whisper of wind. A low metallic hum, followed by the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks. Daniel froze. Trains hadn't passed through this station in decades. He stood slowly, heart-pounding, and stepped back onto the platform. The sound grew louder. A train was coming. He could see it now. A dim light in the distance, approaching far too quickly. The rails began to vibrate beneath his feet, and the air filled with the smell of rust and something else, something sour and rotten. The train emerged from the darkness, its form wrong somehow. The cars were old, far older than any modern train, their paint peeling and their windows black. The headlight flickered weakly, casting jerky shadows across the platform. As it screeched to a halt before him, Daniel felt an overwhelming urge to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The doors slid open with a groan that sounded almost like a sigh, and then he saw them. Passengers. They sat inside, perfectly still, faces pale and expressionless, their eyes, if they were open at all, stared straight ahead, unblinking. Some looked normal at first glance, but the longer he stared, the more he noticed what was wrong. One man's head tilted too far to one side, as if his neck had snapped. A woman's mouth hung open unnaturally wide, her jaw stretched beyond human limits. Another figure's reflection in the window did not match its position, lagging behind like a delayed shadow. "Boarding," a voice whispered behind him. Daniel spun around. There was no one there. The voice came again, closer this time. "Boarding." He turned back toward the train. One of the passengers had moved, now standing in the doorway blocking the entrance. It was a conductor, or at least something wearing a conductor's uniform. The hat was crooked, and the coat hung loosely over a thin, unnatural frame. The face beneath was pale, almost gray, and the eyes were sunken deep into darkness. "Ticket," the figure said, its voice hollow, as though echoing from somewhere far away. Daniel shook his head. I don't have one." The conductor smiled, and the smile was wrong. It stretched too far, exposing teeth that were uneven and far too many. "Then you will ride anyway." The words sent a chill through Daniel's entire body. He stepped back instinctively, but the platform seemed longer now, stretching away as if the station itself were shifting. "No," he said, "I'm not getting on." The conductor tilted its head slowly, studying him. "You already have." Daniel's stomach dropped. He glanced down at his feet. They were no longer on the platform. He was standing just inside the train. He hadn't moved, or at least he didn't remember moving. The door slammed shut behind him. The train lurched forward with a violent jolt, throwing him off balance. He grabbed onto a nearby pole, his hands trembling. "Wait, stop!" he shouted, but the train only picked up speed. The windows remained black, showing no sign of the outside world. The passengers sat in silence, unmoving, as if unaware of his presence, or perhaps deliberately ignoring it. Daniel stumbled down the aisle, desperate to find another door, another way out. "Hello?" he called. "Is anyone—" A hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. He gasped, looking down. The hand belonged to a young girl sitting in one of the seats. Her grip was impossibly strong. Her head turned slowly to face him, her movements jerky and unnatural. "You shouldn't walk," she whispered. Her voice sounded like it was coming from deep underwater. "You'll wake them." "Wake who?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a breath. The girl's eyes widened, and then, all at once, the other passengers began to move. Their heads turned toward him in perfect unison. Eyes opened, mouths stretched into silent screams. The train lights flickered violently, plunging the car into brief moments of darkness. In those flashes, Daniel saw things that made his blood run cold. The passengers were not whole. Some were missing limbs, others had wounds that never bled. Some faces were twisted beyond recognition, as if crushed or burned or broken in ways no living body could survive. "Next stop," the conductor's voice echoed through the car. The end of the line. The train began to slow. The passengers rose from their seats one by one, their movements stiff and unnatural. They began to shuffle toward him. Daniel pulled free from the girl's grip and ran. He pushed through the crowd, ignoring the cold hands brushing against him, the whispers filling his ears. Stay with us. Don't leave." At the end of the car, he found a door. He threw it open and stumbled into the next carriage. This one was different. Empty. But the walls were covered in scratches, deep gouges that looked like they had been made by fingernails. The floor was stained dark, and the air smelled overwhelmingly of decay. The door behind him slammed shut. He tried to open it again, but it wouldn't budge. Slow footsteps echoed from the far end of the carriage. The conductor emerged from the shadows, walking toward him with that same unnatural smile. "You cannot leave," it said. "This train has no exits." "Why?" Daniel demanded, backing away. "What is this place?" The conductor stopped a few feet from him, its head tilted again, almost curious. "This is where they go," it said softly. "The ones who were forgotten, the ones who waited too long." Daniel's mind raced. "I'm not supposed to be here," he said. "This is a mistake." The conductor's smile widened impossibly. "No mistakes." The train came to a complete stop. The lights went out completely. For a moment there was nothing but darkness. And then Daniel heard the doors open. A rush of cold air filled the carriage, carrying with it a sound like distant screaming. "Your stop," the conductor whispered. Daniel turned toward the open doorway. Beyond it was not a station, not a platform, but an endless void of shifting shadows. Shapes moved within it, twisting and reaching as if alive. He stepped back. No, hands grabbed him from behind. The passengers. They had followed him. Their grip was unbreakable, dragging him toward the door. "No, let me go!" he screamed, thrashing wildly. But they were too strong. The conductor watched, its expression unchanged. All passengers must disembark. With one final pull, they threw him into the darkness. Daniel fell, screaming, as the shadows closed around him, wrapping tight, dragging him deeper and deeper. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the train pulling away, its dim light fading into the void. And then silence. The next morning, a man from the village passed by the old station on his way to work. He paused, noticing something strange. For the first time in years, the clock inside the waiting room was ticking again. It read 2:18, and on the bench sat a single figure, perfectly still, a young man, his face pale, his eyes staring straight ahead, unblinking, waiting. The man approached slowly, his boots scraping against the cracked platform, each step hesitant, as if the ground itself might give way beneath him. He had passed this station countless times, yet never had he seen anyone here, not in the morning, not in daylight, and certainly not sitting so still it felt deliberate, as though placed rather than arrived. "Hello?" he called, his voice thin against the heavy silence. The figure did not respond, did not blink, did not breathe. As far as the man could tell, he climbed the platform, heart beginning to pound, an unease settling deep in his chest. The air felt wrong again, too cold for the early morning, too thick, as if something unseen lingered just beyond sight. "Are you all right?" he asked, stepping closer. The young man's clothes were damp, stained with something dark along the sleeves and collar. His hands rested limply on his knees, but the fingers twitched, just once, so subtly it could have been imagined. Relief flickered. The man reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. The reaction was immediate. The young man's head snapped toward him with a sharp, inhuman motion, eyes wide, eyes hollow, eyes that reflected no light. "You shouldn't have touched me," the young man whispered. His voice cracked, layered, as though more than one voice spoke at once. The man stumbled back in shock, nearly losing his footing. What happened to you?" he stammered. The young man's lips trembled, then curled into a faint, broken smile. "I missed my stop." A distant sound cut through the air, the low metallic hum. The man's blood ran cold. "Do you hear that?" the young man asked softly. The man shook his head instinctively. There's nothing. But there was. The sound grew louder, a vibration beneath the platform, a familiar, impossible rhythm. The tracks began to tremble. The young man stood slowly this time with unnatural precision, like a puppet being pulled upright by invisible strings. It's back, he said. It always comes back. The man turned toward the tracks, panic rising. There was nothing there, no light, no train, and yet the sound continued, approaching rapidly. We have to leave, the man said, grabbing the young man's arm, but his grip met resistance. The young man did not move. You can't leave, he said calmly. Not anymore. The man's breath quickened. What are you talking about? The young man's eyes shifted past him, fixing on something behind. The man hesitated, then slowly turned. The station archway, the empty doorway leading into the waiting room. Something stood inside it, a figure, tall, thin, wearing a crooked hat. The conductor. The man's throat tightened. No, he whispered. The figure did not move, yet somehow it felt closer than before, its presence pressing against the air itself. Ticket, it said. The man shook his head frantically. I don't have one. I'm just passing through. The conductor tilted its head just as it had before. You stopped. Its voice echoed unnaturally, stretching the words beyond their natural length. That is enough. The ground trembled violently now. The sound of the train was deafening, though still nothing could be seen on the tracks. The young man's grip tightened suddenly around the man's wrist, far stronger than before. Don't fight it, he whispered. It hurts more if you fight. Let go of me, the man shouted, struggling, but the young man only smiled wider, and now that smile mirrored the conductor's. Too wide, too deep, too wrong. The station lights, though none had worked in years, flickered on for a brief, blinding moment, and in that instant the train appeared. Not arriving, not approaching, already there, slamming into existence with a shriek of metal and air displacement so violent it knocked the man to his knees. The doors were open. The passengers were waiting. This time they were not still. They leaned outward, heads twitching, arms stretching too far, fingers grasping at nothing and everything at once. Boarding, they whispered in unison. The man screamed, trying to crawl away, but the platform seemed to stretch endlessly beneath him, each movement taking him nowhere. The young man stepped calmly toward the train, then paused, looking back. You get used to it, he said quietly. After a while, you stop remembering where you were going. Please, the man cried, help me. For a moment, something flickered in the young man's expression. Hesitation, regret. Then it was gone. He turned and stepped inside. The conductor's gaze shifted to the man still on the ground. Last call, it said. The passengers surged forward. Their hands closed around the man's legs, his arms, his shoulders. He thrashed wildly, screaming, his voice swallowed by the roar of the unseen engine. No, no. They dragged him across the platform, the cold touch of their hands burning like ice against his skin. The doorway loomed closer, darkness beyond it, promising nothing, promising everything. As he was pulled inside, the man caught one last glimpse of the station, the clock in the waiting room ticking. It read 2:19. The doors slammed shut. The train vanished. The silence returned. Later that day, the villagers spoke in hushed tones. A man had gone missing. No trace, no explanation. Some said he had taken the forest path. Others said he must have left town entirely. But one old woman, who had lived there longer than anyone, only shook her head. "The station took him," she said quietly. "It's hungry again." That night the clock ticked once more. 20, and on the bench there were now two figures sitting side by side, still, unblinking, waiting. Their fingers twitched in unison, and far beyond the silent tracks, somewhere in the dark, the train continued its endless journey, never stopping, never slowing, only waiting for the next passenger who lingered just a little too long. Days passed, but the village did not forget. Not this time. There were now whispers that spread faster than reason could silence them. People spoke of the clock, the bench, the figures who appeared where no one had been before. At first, it was only those two, the young man and the one who had tried to help him. But by the third morning, there were three. By the fourth, there were five. No one saw them arrive. No one saw them move. They were simply there, sitting, perfectly still, facing forward. Eyes open, the clock inside the station continued to tick. It had not stopped since it first moved again, and each time a new figure appeared, the minute hand shifted forward exactly once. No more, no less. By the end of the week, it read 2:26. No one dared go near it anymore. Not even in daylight. The path through the woods grew over quickly, as if nature itself was trying to seal the place away. But curiosity is a stubborn thing, and fear, when left to grow, turns into something else. On the seventh night, a group of 4 villagers gathered at the edge of the forest. They carried lanterns, tools, and the kind of determination that comes from believing something must have a rational explanation. "It's just an old structure," one of them insisted. "People are disappearing. There has to be a reason." Another nodded, though his hands trembled. "We check it. We make sure no one's hiding there, that's all." They didn't believe their own words, but they went anyway. The forest was unnaturally quiet as they walked. No insects, no wind, no sound, but their own footsteps and the faint crackle of lantern flames. When the station finally came into view, all 4 of them stopped at once. It looked different, not restored, not repaired, but aware. The darkness inside seemed deeper than it should be, as if the building contained more space than its walls allowed. The clock was visible through the broken window, still ticking. 26. "We go together," the first man said quietly. They climbed onto the platform as one. The bench was there, and the figures, 7 of them now, sitting side by side, perfectly aligned, their clothes different, their faces different, but their stillness identical. One of the villagers let out a sharp breath. Those are people from here." He stepped closer despite himself. "I know them." "Don't," another warned. "Don't get close." But it was too late. The man reached out, trembling, and touched the shoulder of one of the figures. Instantly, all 7 heads turned toward him at once. The lanterns flickered violently. One went out. The man stumbled back in terror. "No, no, no!" The figures stood. Not slowly, not naturally, They rose in perfect synchronization, like a single entity controlling 7 bodies. Their mouths opened, and from them came a sound, not speech, but something deeper, a layered whisper that seemed to come from beneath the ground itself. "Too many," it said. The air dropped in temperature so sharply that frost began to form along the edges of the platform. The remaining lanterns shattered, glass cracking under the sudden cold. Darkness swallowed everything except the faint outline of the station doorway, and within it a familiar shape. The conductor. "Group boarding," it said softly. The ground trembled. The villagers panicked, turning to run. But the forest behind them was gone. In its place was only darkness, an endless stretch of black where no trees stood any more. Where is the path?" someone shouted. "It's gone." The sound of the train erupted all around them, far louder than before. Not approaching, not arriving, already there. The rails screamed, the air warped, and then, like a tear in reality itself, the train appeared again, longer this time, more carriages, stretching impossibly far into the distance, doors open, passengers waiting, not just the ones from before. Now there were more, many more. Faces pressed against the windows, hands clawing at the edges of the doors, smiling, screaming, silent. The 7 figures from the bench began to move toward the villagers, steps perfectly in sync. "Run!" one of the villagers shouted, but there was nowhere to go. The train seemed to surround them now, cars extending far beyond the station itself, impossible geometry folding space inward. The conductor raised a hand. All aboard. The passengers surged forward. The villagers screamed as they were grabbed, pulled, separated. Their lanterns vanished into the chaos. Their voices echoed briefly and then were cut off one by one. Silence returned as quickly as it had broken. The train vanished again, leaving the station exactly as it had been, empty, still, quiet. The clock ticked. 30. The next morning, the village was quieter than ever before. No one spoke about what had happened. Not openly, but everyone knew. The forest path was completely gone now, as if it had never existed. The station could no longer be reached by ordinary means, and yet some claimed that if you walked far enough at night, if you listened closely, you could still find it, not by sight, but by sound. The faint metallic hum of a train that should not exist. And sometimes, if you were unlucky, you would see a flicker of dim light in the distance, not coming toward you, but waiting for you. And somewhere beyond that darkness, the train continued to run endlessly, growing with every passenger it claimed, the conductor standing watch, the doors always open. And inside, among the countless silent figures, there were still empty seats.
saw the cabin, it was already dark. Not the soft blue dark of early evening, but the thick, suffocating kind that settles over small towns after midnight, when porch lights blink out one by one and the world feels abandoned. The town was called Black Hollow. You won't find it on most maps anymore. It sits tucked deep in the forests outside Asheville, though even the locals in Asheville pretend it doesn't exist. Population, barely 300. One gas station, one church, one diner, endless trees. I didn't mean to end up there. My car broke down on a back road about 20 minutes outside town. No signal, no streetlights, just pine trees stretching into the sky like skeletal fingers. I walked the rest of the way, guided by a distant flicker of yellow light. That's when I saw the cabin. It sat alone at the edge of the forest, slightly uphill from the road. The porch sagged in the middle, and the windows reflected nothing but darkness. A wooden sign hung crooked beside the door. Hollow Ridge Cabin. Vacancy. No cars. No footprints in the dirt. Just that warm, steady light glowing from inside. I should have kept walking, but the cold was biting through my jacket, and the woods behind me were too quiet. I knocked. The door creaked open before my knuckles even touched it. Inside stood an old man, tall, thin, skin like paper stretched too tightly over bone. His eyes were pale, almost cloudy. "You look lost," he said. His voice sounded like it hadn't been used in years. "I just need a phone," I replied, "or somewhere to wait until morning." He stared at me for a long moment, then stepped aside. "You can stay." The air inside smelled of damp wood and something metallic. The cabin was larger than it looked from outside. A stone fireplace crackled in the corner, though I hadn't seen smoke rising from the chimney. "There's a room upstairs," he said. "End of the hall. Is there anyone else here?" I asked. He smiled slowly. "Only the ones who don't leave." I laughed nervously, assuming it was a joke. It wasn't. The stairs groaned under my weight. The hallway upstairs stretched farther than it logically should have. I could have sworn the cabin only had one small window upstairs, but now there were 5 doors on each side of the hall, all closed, all identical. The last door at the end stood slightly ajar. That had to be mine. I walked past the first few doors, and as I did I heard something. Breathing. Soft. Slow. On the other side of the wood. I stopped. Silence. I moved again. Breathing followed me. I didn't look. I told myself it was pipes in the walls. Wind. Old wood shifting. But when I reached the final door, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The breathing hadn't stopped. It was behind every door. The room at the end of the hall was small but tidy. A bed, a dresser, a single window overlooking the woods. I locked the door. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. At exactly 3:13 a.m., I know the time because the old digital clock on the dresser flashed red numbers through the dark. 3:13, and someone was standing at the foot of my bed. I couldn't see their face, just a shape, taller than the doorway, head tilted at an unnatural angle. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. The figure leaned closer, and then it was gone. The clock read 3:14. I was empty, except the door. It wasn't locked anymore. It stood open. The hallway was darker than before. The fireplace downstairs had gone out. No light seeped up the stairwell. I heard whispering, not from one room, from all of them. My name, over and over. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. I never told the old man my name. The first door on the left creaked open. A hand reached out. Gray, thin, fingers too long. I stumbled backward. Another door opened, then another. Every door in the hallway swung wide, and inside each room stood someone. They looked like people, but not quite. Their skin sagged loosely as though they were wearing it wrong. Their eyes were sunken and black. Their mouths hung open slightly, revealing teeth filed into jagged points. And they all stared at me. In unison, they took one step forward. The hallway stretched impossibly long behind me, the stairs now miles away. "You stay," they whispered together. I ran. The floorboards warped beneath my feet. The walls bent inward like ribs closing around me. The ceiling lowered. Hands reached from the doorways, grabbing at my jacket, my arms, my hair. I tore free and burst down the stairs, only to find the living room empty. No fireplace, no furniture, no door, just walls of wood. And the old man standing in the center of the room. "You weren't supposed to leave your room," he said softly. "What is this place?" I screamed. He sighed. "A collection." The walls began to shift. Faces pressed outward from the wood. Hundreds of them, eyes blinking beneath the grain, mouths opening, gasping silently. "They get lonely," the old man continued, "and the town doesn't grow much anymore." The walls pulsed. I saw them clearly now. The people from the hallway, and others, children, women, men in old-fashioned clothes, a police officer, a teenager wearing a varsity jacket, all fused into the wood, their bodies distorted and flattened, like insects trapped in amber. "You feed them?" I asked, horrified. He tilted his head. "They feed on fear. The cabin feeds on them." The floor beneath me softened. My shoes sank into it. The wood became warm, wet. I tried to run again, but my legs felt heavy, like they were sinking into mud. The old man stepped closer. "You should have kept walking." His face began to change. His skin split along invisible seams. Beneath it was something black and writhing, like a nest of worms woven into the shape of a skull. His mouth stretched too wide. "Now you stay." The walls surged forward. Hands grabbed my shoulders, my legs, my throat. I screamed as the wood swallowed me whole. It wasn't solid. It was alive. I felt myself flattening, stretching, merging. My skin burned as it fused with the grain. And then, silence. Morning came. The sun rose over Black Hollow. A woman drove down the same back road, her GPS rerouting her through the forest. Her tire blew out near the hill. She cursed and stepped out of her car. And she saw it. Hollow Ridge Cabin. Vacancy. Warm yellow light glowed from the window. She hesitated, then climbed the porch steps. Knocked. The door creaked open. The old man smiled. "You look lost." Behind him, mounted neatly on the wooden wall beside the fireplace, was a new face in the grain. Mine. Eyes open. Mouth frozen mid-scream. And if you ever drive outside Asheville and find yourself on a quiet road with no signal, if you see a cabin with a light on, keep driving. Because the hallway always has one more room, and the cabin is always hungry. The woman on the porch hesitated only a second before stepping inside. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded far too final. The old man studied her the way someone might study a painting they were deciding where to hang. "Car trouble?" he asked gently. She nodded, brushing damp hair from her face. "Tire blew out. I didn't see this place on my way in." "Most don't," he replied. The air inside the cabin felt thicker than it should have, heavy with the scent of sap and something faintly metallic. The fire in the stone hearth burned low and steady, though the flames cast shadows that moved independently along the walls. "You can stay the night," the old man said. "There's a room upstairs, end of the hall." She swallowed. "Is there anyone else here?" His pale eyes glimmered. "Only the ones who don't leave." She forced a laugh. "That's comforting. It isn't meant to be." She followed the sound of her own footsteps across the wooden floor. The boards creaked in slow, deliberate tones, as if announcing her presence to something deeper within the walls. The staircase loomed ahead, taller than the exterior of the cabin would allow. Each step groaned beneath her weight. The hallway above stretched unnaturally long, lined with identical doors. 10 of them, all closed, all silent. At the far end, one door stood slightly open. She felt it before she heard it, a vibration in the air, like a low hum pressing against her ears. Then came the whispering, not words, not yet, just breath. She turned toward the nearest door and placed her hand against it. The wood was warm, too warm. Something on the other side shifted. She jerked her hand back. The door at the end of the hall creaked wider on its own. She hurried toward it, refusing to look left or right. The whispering grew clearer with each step. By the time she reached the room, she could almost make out syllables threading through the air. She stepped inside and slammed the door shut behind her. The room was simple. A bed, a dresser, a small window overlooking the forest. The trees outside stood perfectly still. Despite the wind, she could hear howling faintly somewhere beyond them. She locked the door. She checked it twice. The digital clock on the dresser blinked 12:47 a.m. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it, telling herself she would stay awake. Just until morning. Just until light returned to the world. She must have drifted off. When she opened her eyes again, the clock read 3:13 a.m. The room was colder now, and darker. The window showed nothing but blackness, as if the forest had vanished. She felt it before she saw it. Something standing near the closet. A shape where no shape should be. Tall. Too tall. Its head nearly brushed the ceiling. She froze. The shape tilted slightly as if curious. A sound escaped it. A wet clicking noise deep in its throat. "You shouldn't be here," it whispered. The voice was layered, overlapping with others beneath it. She scrambled backward across the bed, fumbling for the lamp. When the light snapped on, the corner was empty. The closet door, however, stood open, she hadn't opened it. Inside hung no clothes, only darkness, a darkness that seemed to breathe. The door handle behind her rattled, slowly, deliberately. She stared at it in horror. She had locked it. The handle twisted. The lock clicked open by itself. The door crept inward. The hallway beyond was no longer lined with doors. It was lined with faces pressed into the wood. Dozens of them. Their mouths moved silently at first, then gradually formed a single word. Stay. The faces began pushing outward, stretching free from the grain. Bodies peeled from the walls like wet paper. Limbs elongated. Fingers scraped across the floor as they dragged themselves toward her room. She backed away until her shoulders hit the window. The glass felt soft. It rippled beneath her touch. The first of the creatures crossed the threshold. Its body resembled a person only in outline. Its eyes were hollow sockets dripping black sap. We were travelers, it rasped, like you. More poured in behind it. She turned and threw herself at the window. Instead of shattering, it swallowed her arm up to the elbow. The surface tightened around her skin like a mouth. She screamed and yanked herself free, leaving streaks of red behind. The creatures halted. They tilted their heads in eerie unison. The hallway floor began to slope downward, pulling them and her toward the stairs. Gravity shifted violently. She tumbled into the hallway as the walls bent inward. The cabin groaned as if stretching after a long sleep. She slid down the warped staircase and crashed into the living room. The old man stood waiting. "I told you," he said softly. "You can't leave your room." "What is this place?" she cried. The walls pulsed around them. The fire in the hearth flared high, illuminating hundreds of embedded faces in the wood. Some wept, some screamed, some simply stared with empty resignation. "It's hungry," he answered. "It was built that way, long before Black Hollow." The cabin's floor softened like mud beneath her hands. She tried to crawl toward where the door should have been, but there was no door now. Only solid wood. The creatures descended the staircase behind her. Their bodies stretched and fused with the walls as they moved, feeding the structure itself. The old man's skin began to split once more, revealing the writhing darkness beneath. "Every town needs something to keep it alive," he whispered. "And this is ours." The wood surged upward around her waist, gripping tight. She clawed at it, but her fingers sank into the grain. The sensation was not solid. It was muscular, alive. She felt herself flattening as the surface pulled her inward. Her scream echoed through the cabin as her face pressed into the wall beside another. Eyes wide, mouth open, forever frozen in terror. Morning came again to the forest outside Asheville. The cabin looked smaller in daylight, almost abandoned. No smoke from the chimney, no light in the windows. But by dusk, when the trees cast long shadows across the road, the warm yellow glow returned. The sign still read, "Vacancy." And somewhere within the wood, beneath layers of grain and old varnish, two new faces stared outward, waiting for headlights to appear through the trees. Years passed in Black Hollow, though time did not move properly around the cabin. Seasons changed in the forest outside Asheville. Leaves burned orange, snow buried the road, spring thawed the earth. But inside Hollow Ridge Cabin, nothing aged. The fire never truly died, the wood never rotted, and the faces in the walls never closed their eyes. Travelers continued to come, a delivery driver who took a wrong turn, a couple arguing over directions, a college student chasing a rumor about a haunted town. The cabin always appeared when needed, a light in the distance, a promise of warmth, a vacancy sign that never weathered. And every time the door opened, the old man was there, waiting. He never changed, not in height, not in voice, not in that paper-thin smile stretched across his face. But the walls grew thicker, the grain more crowded, the whispers louder. The town of Black Hollow survived because of it. That was the unspoken truth. The diner stayed open despite having barely any customers. The gas station never ran out of fuel. The church bell rang each Sunday, though fewer than a dozen people attended. They all knew about the cabin. They all pretended they didn't. Because every few months a stranger would pass through. And after that, the woods would feel quieter, fed. But hunger always returned. One autumn night, something different happened. A black SUV rolled slowly down the forest road. It didn't hesitate. It didn't break down. It parked deliberately at the base of the hill. 4 people stepped out. They wore dark jackets with reflective lettering across the back. County Sheriff. One of them was Sheriff Holbrook. He'd been born in Black Hollow, raised there. He'd grown up hearing stories about the woods, but had never seen the cabin himself. Not until 3 missing persons reports landed on his desk within the same year. Outsiders, all last seen near the same stretch of road. He climbed the porch steps, hand resting on his holster. The sign read, Hollow Ridge Cabin, vacancy. "You sure about this?" one of his deputies asked. Holbrook didn't answer. He knocked. The door opened instantly. The old man stood framed in firelight. "You look lost," he said calmly. Holbrook stared at him. "I'm not." The air inside felt wrong, charged, like a storm about to break. "We've had reports," Holbrook continued. "People disappearing near this property." The old man tilted his head slightly. "People disappear everywhere." The deputies shifted uneasily. One of them stepped inside without waiting. The floor creaked under his boots. "Sir," the deputy called out, "this place is bigger than it looks." Holbrook followed. The door shut behind them on its own. The fire in the hearth flared higher. The walls seemed to expand subtly, inhaling. "We'll need to look around," Holbrook said firmly. "Of course," the old man replied. "The rooms are upstairs, end of the hall." The deputies moved toward the staircase. One glanced back at Holbrook. "Feels like it's watching us," he muttered. It was. As they climbed, the hallway stretched longer than any of them expected. Doors lined both sides, closed, silent. "Open them," Holbrook ordered. The first deputy reached for a handle. The moment it turned, the whispering began. Low at first, then overlapping. 1,000 murmurs pressing against their ears. The door swung open. inside was not a room, but a wall of faces, pressed tight together, eyes blinking, lips trembling. One face pushed forward slightly from the wood. It was fresh, its skin not yet fully blended into the grain. "Help!" it croaked before the wood swallowed its mouth again. The deputy stumbled backward. What the hell is this? Every door along the hallway burst open simultaneously. The whispers rose into a single deafening command. "Stay!" The hallway lights flickered and died. The staircase behind them elongated, stretching downward into darkness. The old man's voice drifted up from below. "You shouldn't have come." The walls pulsed. Hands began forcing their way out of the wood. Dozens, then hundreds, grabbing at uniforms, pulling at belts, clawing at skin. One deputy fired his weapon. The gunshot echoed unnaturally, absorbed into the wood like a stone thrown into water. The bullet left no mark. The cabin shuddered violently. The floor tilted. The ceiling bent downward. Sheriff Halbrook drew his gun, but felt the wood beneath his boots soften. It wrapped around his ankles, tightening like restraints. "This town feeds you," the old man called from below. "You've always known." Halbrook looked down the hallway at the faces. Some were strangers, but some were not. A mechanic who vanished 20 years ago. A teenage girl who ran away. A drifter found only by his abandoned truck. Black Hollow's secrets, preserved forever. "We protect this town," the old man continued, now standing at the base of the staircase. His skin began to split, revealing the shifting darkness beneath. "And the town protects us." The deputies screamed as the walls consumed them. Their bodies flattened against the wood, limbs distorting, faces stretching into silent masks of terror. Halbrook fought harder than the others. He clawed at the railing as the wood climbed his legs. "It doesn't have to be this way," he shouted. The old man's smile widened impossibly. "It already is." The cabin inhaled deeply. The walls sealed shut. Silence fell once more. By morning, the SUV was gone. The road showed no tire tracks. The missing persons reports were quietly closed. The town of Black Hollow continued as it always had. But something had changed inside Hollow Ridge Cabin. The old man now stood slightly straighter, slightly broader in the shoulders. His voice when he spoke carried a deeper echo. Because the cabin does not just consume, it absorbs, it learns, it becomes. And on certain nights, if you stand at the edge of the forest outside Asheville and listen closely, you can hear it breathing, slow, patient, waiting for the next knock at the door. Winter settled heavily over the forest outside Asheville, blanketing the road in ice and silence. For months, no cars passed, no headlights cut through the trees. Even the animals avoided the hill where Hollow Ridge Cabin stood. The cabin did not like long stretches without feeding. The whispers in the walls grew restless. Faces shifted beneath the grain, pressing outward harder than before. Some began to separate at the edges, as though the wood could no longer fully contain them. Inside, the old man stood motionless before the fireplace. But he was not quite the same anymore. His movements sometimes glitched, jerking unnaturally before smoothing out again. His voice occasionally overlapped with others when he spoke, as though multiple throats were trying to use the same mouth. The sheriff had changed things. The cabin had absorbed authority, control, memory. It had learned what radios were, what patrol routes looked like, how reports were filed. It was thinking now in ways it hadn't before. One night, just after midnight, the lights in Black Hollow flickered. The diner's neon sign buzzed and went dark. The gas station pumps shut off mid-transaction. In homes throughout town, clocks reset to 3:13 a.m. The same time. Every house, every device. The forest exhaled, and for the first time in decades, the cabin moved, not physically, not in a way visible to the eye, but in presence. The road leading to it subtly shifted, curved differently. Signs pointing away from town twisted overnight, their arrows bending ever so slightly toward the woods. GPS systems began rerouting drivers off the main highway, suggesting a faster way through unfamiliar back roads. The hunger was no longer patient. It was proactive. The first to arrive was not a lost traveler, but a rideshare driver following an app's directions. Confused, he muttered about poor signal as he turned onto the forest road. His headlights illuminated falling snow, and then the cabin, warm and glowing as if expecting him. The sign looked newer now, cleaner, the word vacancy freshly painted. He barely had time to question why his app marked this as a pickup location before his engine died. The porch light flicked on. The door opened slowly. The old man stepped out, but his silhouette flickered strangely in the light, at moments splitting into overlapping shapes before merging again. "You look lost," he called softly. Back in town, people pretended not to notice the outages, pretended not to notice that more strangers were passing through lately, pretended not to notice the road seemed easier to find than before, because Black Hollow was thriving now. The diner was busy again. The gas station expanded. New paint covered old buildings. Prosperity had returned. And in the woods, the hallway inside Hollow Ridge Cabin grew longer. More doors formed. More rooms waited at the end of the hall. If you ever find yourself driving near Asheville and your GPS insists on a shortcut through trees you don't recognize, if your signal drops at exactly 3:13 a.m., if you see a warm light glowing where no structure should be, don't slow down. Don't check your map. Don't convince yourself it's just a coincidence. Because the cabin is no longer waiting for the lost. It is finding them, and the hallway always has room for one more. city of Asheville never truly slept. Even at 2:17 a.m., when the apartment windows were dark and the traffic lights blinked over empty intersections, something lingered in the air, a low electric hum beneath the concrete, a vibration too steady to be natural. Mara Ellison had worked the graveyard shift beneath Central Station for 3 weeks when she began to notice it. The control room was narrow and windowless, lit by cold fluorescent panels that flattened everything into gray. 12 security monitors covered the wall. 11 showed empty platforms and silent corridors. The 12th showed Platform 7. Platform 7 had been closed for 12 years after an alleged tunnel collapse. The reports were sealed, the blueprints revised, and the entrance welded shut. Yet every night at exactly 2:19 a.m., Camera 12 flickered to life. The lights on the abandoned platform buzzed on, and people appeared. They did not walk down the stairs. They did not enter from the tunnels. They were simply there, standing in still rows along the yellow safety line, facing the tracks as if waiting for something. Men in outdated suits, women in dresses from another decade, a little boy holding a red balloon that never moved. None of them spoke. None of them blinked. At 2:20 a.m., the sound began. A distant metallic screech rolled through the speakers in the control room, the unmistakable approach of a train. Mara checked the system logs the first time it happened. There was no scheduled arrival, no active line, no power routed to that track. Yet the rails on the screen trembled. Wind whipped through the figures' coats and hair, though nothing else in the station moved. Then headlights burst from the darkness of the tunnel, a blinding white glare that swallowed the camera feed for a fraction of a second. When the image stabilized, a train stood at the platform. Its exterior was wrong. The metal looked warped, blistered, as if it had been burned and cooled too quickly. The windows were black, reflecting nothing. The doors slid open. No conductor stepped out. No announcement echoed. The waiting figures boarded in silence, moving stiffly, almost mechanically. The child with the red balloon was the last to enter. When he turned toward the camera, his face was smooth and pale, his eyes completely black. The doors shut, the train pulled away, and as it disappeared into the tunnel, every passenger turned in unison to stare directly into the lens. The feed cut to static. At 2:21 a.m., Platform 7 was empty again. The lights snapped off. The hum faded. Mara reported the malfunction the first night. Her supervisor didn't look surprised. He told her to log it as interference and never rewind the footage. "It's residual imaging," he said flatly. "Old systems do that." But the next night, Mara watched again, and the next. On the 5th night, she saw someone she recognized, herself, standing among the waiting passengers wearing the same gray transit uniform. Her face was expressionless. Her eyes were black. When the headlights flared and the train arrived, the other Mara stepped forward first. The doors opened. She hesitated only a moment before boarding. The real Mara stumbled back from the monitors, her pulse hammering in her ears. She checked the timestamp. 2:19 a.m. She looked down at her hands to reassure When she looked back at the screen, every passenger on platform 7 had turned toward the camera again. They were no longer waiting for the train. They were waiting for her. The intercom crackled. A voice she had never heard before whispered through the speaker, soft and distorted. Final boarding. The door to the control room clicked behind her. It had never locked automatically before. The fluorescent lights overhead began to flicker in rhythm with the monitor. 2:20 a.m. The metallic screech grew louder. Not from the speakers this time, but from somewhere deep within the station. The walls trembled. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The camera feed shifted as if the lens itself had tilted slightly upward. She could see more of the platform now, and at the far end of the screen, beyond the crowd of silent figures, she saw the welded security gate that supposedly sealed the staircase to platform 7. It was no longer closed. It stood wide open, darkness yawning beyond it. Something moved inside that darkness. Something tall and thin, unfolding itself slowly as though it had been compressed for years. The train burst from the tunnel again, brighter than before. The doors slid open with a shriek that seemed almost eager. The figures did not move this time. They simply stared at the camera, waiting. The intercom whispered again, "You're late." The control room door swung open behind her. A gust of freezing air rushed in, carrying the smell of rust and damp earth. Mara turned slowly. The hallway outside was no longer the tiled corridor she knew. It was a stairwell descending into shadow, lit by the sickly flicker of fluorescent lights. A yellow line ran down the center of the steps. She did not remember standing up. She did not remember walking. But suddenly she was at the top of the stairs, one hand gripping the cold metal railing. Below her, she could see platform 7. The waiting passengers stood exactly as they had on the monitor, their heads tilted upward in perfect unison. Looking at her, the tall, thin shape stood beside the open train doors now, its limbs too long, its outline blurred, as if it existed half in smoke. It raised one elongated arm and pointed gently toward the entrance. The train emitted a low, resonant hum that matched the vibration she had always felt in her teeth. Step by step, Mara descended. The air grew colder, the hum grew louder. When her foot touched the platform floor, the passengers parted to make space for her. She walked past the child with the red balloon. His black eyes followed her. The doors remained open. Inside the train, the seats were filled with more figures, their faces pressed against the windows from within. The tall shape leaned closer, its featureless face inches from hers. In its reflection on the train's metal surface, she saw herself, pale, hollow-eyed, already fading. The intercom echoed one last time. "Welcome aboard." The doors slammed shut. At 2:21 a.m., the control room beneath Central Station was empty. The monitors displayed silent, vacant platforms. Camera 12 showed nothing but darkness. The next night at 2:19 a.m., the lights on platform 7 flickered back to life. The waiting passengers appeared, and among them stood a woman in a gray transit uniform. her eyes black as the tunnel behind her, facing the tracks as the sound of the approaching train began once more. The city of Blackridge was built on layers, old brick beneath new steel, forgotten tunnels beneath polished streets, sealed foundations beneath glittering towers. People joked that if you dug deep enough, you would find another city staring back at you. No one joked about it after the sinkholes began. The first opened on a quiet Tuesday morning, swallowing a parked car whole. There was no explosion, no warning crack in the asphalt, just a sudden yawning void and the sickening crunch of metal folding into darkness. The city blamed unstable infrastructure. The news blamed heavy rainfall. But the holes were too precise, too clean, like something had opened its mouth from below. Elena Voss, an urban surveyor assigned to inspect structural risks, was sent to document the damage. She expected fractured pipes and collapsed sewer lines. Instead, when she peered into the first sinkhole, she saw a staircase. It spiraled downward into perfect blackness, its steps smooth and deliberate, carved from stone older than the surrounding concrete. It had not been broken by the collapse. It had been revealed. The police cordoned off the area, but Eleanor returned that night alone. The city above was quieter after midnight, the constant traffic replaced by distant sirens and the hollow wind between buildings. She slipped beneath the barrier tape and lowered herself into the hole. The air below was cold and dry, carrying a faint metallic scent. Her flashlight beam cut through dust motes, illuminating the spiral steps. There were no markings, no graffiti, no debris. The staircase felt untouched by time. As she descended, the sounds of the city faded until there was nothing but her breathing and the soft echo of her boots. After what felt like 20 flights, the staircase opened into a corridor. The walls were lined with doors, dozens of them, each identical, smooth metal, no handles, no hinges visible, each marked with a number painted in black. 1, 2, 3. The numbers continued far into the distance. She approached door 17 at random and pressed her hand against it. It was warm, not like metal warmed by sunlight, warm like skin. She jerked her hand back. A low vibration traveled through the corridor, subtle but unmistakable. It felt like something shifting behind the doors, breathing behind them. Then she heard it. A knock, not from the door she touched, from every door at once. A soft, synchronized tapping, as though dozens of knuckles rapped politely from the other side. She stepped back, her flashlight trembling in her grip. The knocking grew louder, more urgent. The metal doors began to bulge outward slightly, warping under pressure from within. The numbers painted on them seemed to pulse, the black ink darkening and spreading like spilled oil. Elena turned and ran toward the staircase, but it was gone. In its place stood another door, larger than the rest, unnumbered. It had a handle, and it was slowly turning. The knocking stopped instantly. The silence that followed was suffocating. The large door creaked open by a fraction, revealing a thin slice of darkness inside. From that darkness came the faint glow of city lights. Headlights, neon signs, illuminated windows. She realized with a growing that she was looking at Blackridge, but not from below. From behind, the city she saw was wrong. The buildings leaned at impossible angles. The streets were empty of cars, but crowded with figures, standing shoulder to shoulder, all facing upward as if watching something high above them. Watching her. A hand shot out from the crack in the door and grabbed her wrist. The skin was cold and impossibly smooth. More hands followed, reaching through widening gaps in the metal doors along the corridor. Pale fingers clawed at the air, brushing her coat, tangling in her hair. The numbered doors burst open one by one with deafening clangs. Behind each was not a room, but a fragment of the city. An apartment bedroom, a subway platform, a hospital hallway, each empty except for a single dark figure standing motionless in the center. They began stepping forward in unison. Elena screamed and pulled against the grip on her wrist. The hand tightened. The door before her swung wider, and she saw herself standing in the distorted city beyond, staring back with hollow eyes. The version of her in that other place smiled slowly, then raised a hand in a small, patient wave. "Switch," it whispered, though its lips barely moved. The corridor floor cracked beneath Elena's feet. The walls trembled as if something vast was turning in its sleep. The hands dragged her toward the widening doorway. She dug her heels into the stone, clawing at the ground. But the surface felt soft now, pliable like packed soil. The figures from the numbered rooms stepped fully into the corridor. Their faces were featureless, smooth as mannequins, but their heads tilted curiously as they watched her struggle. The other Elena stepped closer from within the distorted cityscape. "It's your turn," it said gently. With a final violent yank, the hands pulled her through the doorway. The corridor vanished. The staircase vanished. The sinkhole in the street sealed itself silently before dawn. The next morning, city officials announced that structural repairs had been completed overnight. The asphalt was smooth and unbroken. Elena Voss returned to work at 9 a.m. sharp. She smiled at her colleagues. She reviewed safety reports. She signed off on a statement claiming that the sinkhole had been caused by natural erosion. No one noticed that she no longer blinked as often. No one noticed that when she stood near storm drains or subway grates, she sometimes tilted her head slightly, as if listening. Weeks later, another sinkhole opened across town. Clean, precise, waiting. The second sinkhole opened beneath a crowded intersection at rush hour. Traffic screamed to a halt as the asphalt folded inward like paper, revealing the same spiraling staircase descending into blackness. This time, dozens of people saw it before the authorities sealed the perimeter. Videos flooded social media for exactly 11 minutes before they were removed for public safety concerns. By noon, concrete barricades surrounded the site. By evening, the staircase was officially declared a fractured sewer shaft. By midnight, it was gone. But beneath the city of Blackridge, something had shifted. Elena felt it the moment the hole appeared. chest, slow and steady, like a second heartbeat that did not belong to her. She stood at her office window 20 floors above the street and watched the emergency vehicles swarm. The distorted reflection of the skyline shimmered faintly in the glass beside her, buildings leaning ever so slightly, as though gravity worked differently in that mirrored world. She blinked, and it was normal again. She no longer needed to descend the staircase physically. At night, when she closed her eyes, she stood once more in the corridor of numbered doors. They were all open now. The fragments of the city behind them had grown clearer, more detailed. She saw kitchens where families ate dinner, unaware that something watched from the corner where the light did not reach. She saw hospital rooms where patients slept, while featureless figures stood beside their beds, tilting their smooth heads in patient observation. She saw subway cars stalled between stations, their passengers frozen mid-motion, as though time there had thinned to a fragile film. And at the end of the corridor stood the unnumbered door, wide open. Through it, the other Black Ridge pulsed with activity. The sky there churned in slow spirals of gray and violet. The streets were filled with those hollow figures now, shoulder to shoulder, all facing upward.
The last bell. It was a cold November evening when Daniel realized he had forgotten his notebook at school. The building was already closed, but the janitor recognized him and let him in. "Be quick, the old man said. "The last bell rings soon." Daniel laughed. "The last bell? School ended hours ago." The hallways were silent. Lockers stood like tall metal shadows. Every step Daniel took echoed through the building. His classroom was on the 3rd floor. When he reached it, the door creaked open slowly. Inside, the lights flickered. His notebook sat exactly where he left it, on the last desk near the window. As he grabbed it, the school bell rang. Brrrg! Daniel froze. The bell wasn't supposed to ring. Then he heard something else. Chairs scraping. He turned slowly. The desks around him were moving, inch by inch, sliding across the floor as if someone invisible was sitting down in them. Another sound followed, whispering. Soft voices filled the room. "Class is starting." Daniel's heart pounded. He ran toward the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it. The lights went out. In the darkness, he heard footsteps walking toward him, slow, heavy. Then the light flickered back on for a second, and Daniel saw them, students. Dozens of pale students sitting at the desks. Their eyes were completely black. At the front of the class stood a teacher Daniel had never seen before. Her neck was twisted slightly, like it had been broken. She slowly raised a piece of chalk and wrote on the board, "Detention forever." Daniel screamed and rushed for the door. It burst open, and he ran down the hallway, the whispers chasing him. "Stay. Class isn't over." He didn't stop until he reached the entrance. Outside, the janitor was waiting. Daniel gasped, "There's something upstairs." The janitor looked at him sadly. "You heard the last bell, didn't you?" Daniel nodded. The old man whispered, "That means they marked you present." Then the school bell rang again behind them. And from the dark hallway, Daniel's name echoed in dozens of voices. "Daniel, take your seat." Daniel stood frozen outside the school gate as the voices whispered his name from the dark hallway behind him. "Daniel, take your seat." The janitor slowly closed the heavy front doors and locked them. The echo of the lock clicking sounded louder than the bell itself. "You should go home," the janitor said quietly. But Daniel couldn't move. His legs felt heavy, like something inside the school was pulling him back. "What was that?" Daniel asked, his voice shaking. The janitor looked at the building for a long moment before answering. "This school used to stay open late. Night classes, detention, extra lessons. But years ago something happened after the last bell." Daniel swallowed. "What happened?" The janitor didn't answer right away. The wind pushed dry leaves across the empty schoolyard. Finally, he spoke. One winter night, a group of students were kept in detention by a teacher who refused to let them leave until their work was perfect. The bell rang, but the teacher ignored it. The students stayed. Hours passed. Snowstorm came. Power went out. No one realized they were still inside. Daniel's stomach twisted. What happened to them? The janitor's eyes looked tired. They were found the next morning. Every student sitting at their desk, exactly like a class in session. Daniel whispered, "Dead?" The janitor nodded slowly. Frozen. The heating had stopped when the power died. Daniel looked back at the school. One classroom window on the 3rd floor flickered with light. "But I saw them." The janitor sighed. "Sometimes the bell rings again. When it does, the class returns." Daniel tried to laugh, but it came out weak. Ghost stories. Then the bell rang again. Brrrr. The sound was louder this time. The lights inside the school turned on one by one, floor by floor. First floor, second floor, third floor. Daniel's heart dropped. Silhouettes appeared in the classroom windows. Students, sitting perfectly still, all facing the front of the class. One figure stood up slowly, the twisted-neck teacher. Even from the schoolyard, Daniel could see her arm lift. She pointed directly at him. The school doors slammed open. The hallway lights flickered violently. The whisper returned, louder now. Daniel, class has started. Daniel stepped backward. No. The janitor grabbed his arm. Don't listen. Walk away. But the whisper grew stronger, like dozens of voices layered together. Late students must report. Late students must report. Daniel suddenly felt dizzy. His feet began walking toward the doors. He tried to stop, but couldn't. I can't control it, he cried. The janitor pulled harder. For a moment, Daniel stopped moving. Then the third bell rang, the loudest yet. The janitor's grip slipped. Daniel walked straight through the doors into the hallway. The doors slammed shut behind him. Darkness swallowed the entrance. Inside, the school felt different. The air was cold, colder than winter outside. Lockers rattled softly as he walked past them. His feet moved on their own toward the stairs. Step, step, step. Every floor he passed looked wrong. Classroom doors were open. Desks were full of silent students staring at empty chalkboards. None of them moved. None of them blinked. But every head slowly turned as Daniel passed. Third floor. The hallway light flickered. At the end of the corridor was his classroom. The door slowly opened by itself. Inside, the ghostly class sat exactly where he saw them before. The teacher stood at the front with chalk in her hand. The blackboard now had more words written across it. Attendance. The teacher turned her broken neck toward him. Crack, crack, crack. She smiled slowly. You are late. Daniel tried to speak, but his voice was gone. The teacher pointed to the only empty chair in the room. Take your seat. The chair slid backward across the floor, waiting for him. The other students watched silently with their black eyes. Daniel stepped forward, one step, then another, until he sat down. The chair slid forward on its own. The teacher wrote something else on the board. Class will never end. Then she turned back toward the class. Page 1. Every student slowly opened their notebooks. Daniel looked down. His notebook was already open. On the first page were the words, Welcome to detention. Suddenly, the bell rang again, but this time, it didn't stop ringing. And outside in the empty schoolyard, the janitor stood alone staring at the dark building. He sighed quietly and whispered, Another one marked present. Inside the classroom, Daniel finally understood the truth. The last bell wasn't the end of school. It was the beginning. And the class would continue forever. The bell kept ringing, not loud anymore, but constant, like a heartbeat echoing through the school walls. Daniel sat frozen in the desk, while the other students slowly turned the pages of their notebooks at the exact same time. Flip. The sound was perfectly synchronized. The teacher's twisted neck cracked again as she faced the blackboard. "Lesson 1, she said softly. Her voice sounded like chalk scraping glass. Daniel looked around. None of the students were breathing. None of them blinked. But their pencils began to move across the pages. Scratching, writing, scratching, writing. Daniel looked down at his own notebook. His hand slowly picked up the pencil without him moving it. The pencil began writing by itself. The words formed slowly. "How did you die?" Daniel's heart pounded. "I'm not dead," he whispered. The teacher stopped writing on the board. Every pencil in the classroom stopped at the exact same moment. Slowly, every head turned toward him. The teacher smiled wider. Everyone says that at first. The lights flickered again. For a moment, Daniel saw something terrifying. The classroom changed. The desks were old and broken. Ice covered the floor. The windows were frozen shut. Snow had blown inside. The students sitting around him were no longer pale. They were blue and stiff, like frozen statues. Then the lights flickered again, and the normal ghostly classroom returned. Daniel pushed his chair back. "I'm leaving." The teacher slammed the chalk onto the desk. The classroom door slammed shut again. The whispers started rising around him. "No one leaves detention. No one leaves detention. No one leaves detention." The voices grew louder and louder until Daniel covered his ears. Suddenly, one student across from him lifted their hand slowly. Their arm cracked as it moved. "Teacher, he doesn't understand the rules." The teacher nodded. "Then we will show him." She turned toward Daniel and pointed at the blackboard again. The writing changed by itself. The chalk floated across the board, writing new words. Recess. The bell rang again. Instantly, every student stood up at the same time. Chairs slammed against the floor. Daniel stumbled backward as the classroom door creaked open. The hallway outside was darker than before. The teacher spoke again. "Recess lasts 10 minutes. She looked directly into Daniel's eyes. "If you're not back before the bell, you join the hallway." Daniel didn't ask what that meant. The students began walking into the hallway slowly. Their footsteps echoed like hollow wood. Daniel followed carefully behind them. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Lockers lined both sides, but many were bent open, like something inside had tried to escape. One locker door suddenly slammed shut by itself. Daniel jumped. A student beside him whispered without moving their mouth. "They're still in there." Daniel stepped away quickly. At the end of the hallway was a staircase leading down to the gym. The students walked toward it. Daniel hesitated, then followed. The gym doors opened slowly. Inside was darkness, except for a faint light above the basketball hoop. The floor was covered in dust. Old sports equipment lay scattered everywhere. The ghost students spread out across the gym silently. Some stood under the basketball hoop. Some sat on the bleachers. One student bounced a basketball slowly. Boom, boom, boom. Each bounce echoed too long. Daniel backed toward the exit. Then he noticed something. A door in the far corner of the gym, slightly open. A red exit sign glowed above it. His heart jumped. A way out. He slowly walked toward it. The other students didn't seem to notice. The basketball kept bouncing behind him. Boom, Boom, boom. He reached the door and pushed it open quietly. It led to a narrow maintenance hallway. Pipes ran along the ceiling. A single light flickered. At the end of the hallway, stairs leading outside. Daniel started running. His footsteps echoed loudly now. Halfway down the hallway, the bell rang again. Daniel froze. Recess was over. Behind him, the gym doors slammed open violently. Dozens of footsteps began running into the hallway. Fast. Too fast. The whispers screamed now. Class is back in session. Class is back in session. Class is back in session. Daniel ran toward the stairs. The footsteps behind him got closer. He reached the stairs and burst through the door at the top, but the staircase didn't lead outside. It led back to the third-floor hallway, the same hallway as before. The classroom door stood open, waiting for him. The teacher stood inside, smiling. Every ghost student was already back at their desks, except one empty seat, Daniel's seat. The teacher slowly checked the clock on the wall. "You are 3 seconds late." Daniel backed away slowly. The hallway behind him grew darker. Shapes moved inside the shadows between the lockers. Hands began pushing through the locker vents from the inside. Pale fingers reaching out, scratching, grabbing. The teacher spoke one last time. "Late students." The locker doors burst open all at once. Dozens of shadowy figures crawled out from inside them. "Join the hallway," Daniel screamed as the shadows rushed toward him, and inside the classroom. The bell rang again. Daniel turned and ran. The shadows spilling from the lockers rushed behind him, their long fingers scraping the floor. The teacher didn't chase him. She simply stood in the doorway of the classroom, smiling calmly while the bell continued ringing somewhere deep inside the building. Daniel sprinted down the hallway, but something was wrong. The corridor stretched longer with every step. The ceiling lights flickered one by one, turning off behind him. Darkness swallowed the hallway piece by piece. The whispers followed. Late, late, late. Daniel reached the stairwell and slammed the door open. He rushed down the steps 2 at a time. First floor, then the second floor, then the first floor again. He stopped suddenly, his chest heaving. The sign on the wall clearly said third floor. "No, no," Daniel whispered. The building had trapped him. The bell rang again. This time it sounded slower, heavier, like something massive was pulling the rope. From the stairwell above him came footsteps, slow, patient. Step, crack, step, crack. The teacher was coming. Daniel burst through the stairwell door back into the hallway. The lockers on this floor were different. Older, rusted. Some had claw marks across the metal. A faint blue light flickered from one locker at the end of the corridor. Daniel slowly walked toward it. Inside, he could hear breathing. Weak, shaky breathing. He pulled the locker door open. A boy sat curled inside. Unlike the others, his eyes weren't black. They were normal, terrified. "You're alive?" Daniel whispered. The boy nodded quickly. "Not for long if she finds you." "The teacher?" The boy nodded again. "She keeps us here until we stop trying to leave." Daniel helped him out of the locker. "How long have you been here?" The boy looked down the hallway nervously. "Time doesn't work here," maybe hours, maybe years. The footsteps in the stairwell grew louder. Step, crack, step, crack. The boy grabbed Daniel's sleeve. "We have to get to the boiler room." "Why?" "It's the only place she doesn't go." They began running down the hallway together. The lights flickered violently now. Some lockers burst open as they passed, skeletal hands reaching out before snapping back inside. The whispers were screaming now. "Class is starting. Class is starting." They reached the end of the hallway and pushed through a heavy metal door. The staircase behind it led deep underground. The air became warmer as they descended. The bell sound faded slightly. At the bottom was a dark room filled with old pipes and a massive rusted boiler. Steam hissed quietly from the valves. The boy collapsed against the wall, breathing heavily. "She hates this place," he said. "Too much heat." Daniel leaned against the boiler. "Then we're safe." For a moment, everything was silent. Then something tapped the metal pipe above them. Tap. Daniel looked up. Another tap echoed from deeper in the pipes. Tap, tap, tap. The boy's face turned pale. "That's not the teacher." The tapping grew louder. Something was moving through the pipes, crawling through them. The metal began shaking. Steam burst from one of the valves with a loud scream. Then the bell rang again. But now it sounded like it was coming from inside the boiler room. The heavy door behind them slowly creaked open. The teacher stepped inside. Her twisted neck bent further than before, her head hanging slightly to the side. She smiled wider than any human should. "Recess is over." Daniel grabbed a metal pipe from the floor. "Stay back." The teacher didn't stop walking. The pipes above them suddenly burst open. Dark shapes poured out. Thin, ghostly students crawling across the ceiling like spiders. The boy screamed. The teacher raised her hand calmly. "Return to class." Instantly, the crawling figures dropped to the floor and surrounded Daniel and the boy. The teacher looked pleased. "Detention continues." The bell stopped ringing. The classroom door upstairs slammed shut on its own, and in the boiler room, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the boiler room. For a few seconds, Daniel couldn't see anything at all. The only sounds were the hissing pipes and the slow dripping of water from the ceiling. Then something moved. A faint blue glow appeared across the room. One by one, the ghostly students' eyes began to glow in the darkness, like dozens of tiny lanterns. They surrounded Daniel and the other boy in a circle. The teacher stepped forward slowly, her broken neck tilting further to the side. "You tried to skip class," she said calmly. Her voice echoed through the pipes. "Skipping class has consequences." Daniel gripped the metal pipe tighter. "Why are you doing this?" he shouted. The teacher's smile faded slightly. For the first time, her face looked angry. "Because class must continue." The pipes above them rattled violently again. Steam burst from a crack and filled the room with a thick white fog. Through the fog, Daniel saw the ghost students moving closer. Their footsteps dragged across the concrete floor like chains. The boy beside him whispered quickly, "Don't let them touch you." "Why?" "Because once they do..." Before he finished, a ghost student lunged forward. Daniel swung the metal pipe as hard as he could. The pipe passed straight through the ghost's body like mist. The student didn't stop. A freezing hand grabbed Daniel's arm. The cold was unbearable. It felt like ice burning under his skin. Daniel screamed and pulled away. The ghost's fingers left frost marks on his sleeve. The teacher clapped her hands once. Instant silence filled the room. "Enough games," she said. "Return them to their seats." The students began walking forward together. Their glowing eyes surrounded Daniel and the other boy completely. The boy panicked and ran toward the door. Two ghosts grabbed him instantly. He screamed, "Help me!" Daniel tried to reach him, but the ghosts dragged the boy across the floor. His hands clawed at the concrete as they pulled him toward the door. "Please," the boy cried. The teacher looked down at him calmly. "Late students belong in the hallway." The ghosts dragged the boy out of the boiler room.
Quiet house on Briar Hollow Road. Briar Hollow Road curved away from the highway, like something trying to escape notice. 6 houses lined the narrow stretch of cracked asphalt, each set back behind thin yards and older trees that leaned too close together. At the very end stood the Cresswell house, white paint peeling, porch swing unmoving, windows like blank, patient eyes. It had been empty for 9 years, long enough for children to grow into teenagers who only half remembered why their parents lowered their voices when they rode bikes past it, long enough for weeds to claim the garden and for the mailbox to rust shut, long enough for the story to become less a memory and more a warning. Then, one Thursday morning in late October, the lights came back on. Mrs. Henley noticed first. She always did. She had been awake before sunrise for 3 decades, watching the street from behind lace curtains, with a mug of black coffee warming her hands. At 6:12 a.m., she saw a soft amber glow behind the curtains of the Cresswell house. She blinked once, twice. The light stayed on. Her coffee cup rattled against the saucer. By noon, everyone in Alders Ridge knew someone had moved into the house where Daniel Cresswell had disappeared. Daniel Cresswell had not been the kind of man people expected to vanish. He worked at the feed store, coached Little League in the spring, and waved at passing cars whether he knew the driver or not. On the night he went missing, he and his wife, Mara, had eaten meatloaf for dinner. That much had been confirmed. The plates were still in the sink when deputies arrived. Mara had called at 10:43 p.m., her voice steady as she told dispatch her husband had gone for a walk after dinner and hadn't returned. Search parties combed the woods for weeks. They dragged the quarry lake. They checked abandoned barns and drainage tunnels. Nothing surfaced. No body, no blood, no sign of struggle. Just a man erased from the map. 3 months later, Mara packed a single suitcase and left town without ceremony. She sold the house through an out-of-state attorney and disappeared as completely as her husband. Sheriff Colin Avery had been a deputy back then, young, ambitious. Certain every mystery had a loose thread if you pulled hard enough. that someone had purchased the Cresswell property, something tightened in his chest. The new owner introduced himself 3 days after the lights appeared. Thomas Hale, mid-40s, lean build, neatly trimmed hair graying at the temples. He went door to door with a peach pie and an easy smile. Figured I should introduce myself, he told Mrs. Henley. His voice was soft but precise, like each word had been practiced before leaving his mouth. When she later tried to describe him, she struggled. He was polite, she said. Normal. I just can't remember his eyes. Sheriff Avery drove out that Saturday. The house looked freshly tended, curtains replaced, porch swept, wind chimes untangled. Hale opened the door before Avery knocked. "Sheriff," he said pleasantly, as if he had been expecting him. "Just checking in," Avery replied. "House has history." "Yes," Hale said. "I read about that." He stepped aside but did not invite Avery in. "Terrible thing, a disappearance. You aware it's still open?" Avery asked. "Unresolved." Hale's expression did not change. Some things resolve themselves in time. Avery let his gaze drift past Hale's shoulder. The interior looked orderly, sparse furniture, fresh paint, no photographs. "You planning on staying long?" Avery asked. "I like quiet places," Hale said. "They let you hear what matters." That night at 3:17 a.m., Mrs. Henley woke to a sound she could not place at first. A metallic bite, a pause, another bite. She lay still, heart fluttering, and realized it sounded like a shovel striking dirt. The noise came faintly from the direction of the Cresswell house. The next morning she told her neighbor, who admitted she'd heard something similar. By afternoon, 3 separate households claimed they had been disturbed by rhythmic digging in the night. Sheriff Avery dismissed it publicly. Animals, old houses shifting. But privately, he drove past Briar Hollow after midnight. He parked with his lights off and listened. For a long time, there was nothing but wind brushing branches together. Then, just as he considered leaving, he heard it. A dull thud, metal entering soil. Slow, methodical. Avery stepped out of the cruiser. The sound stopped instantly. The yard lay still beneath the moonlight. No movement, no silhouette. Only the faint scent of turned earth lingering in the air. The next day, Avery requested the original Cresswell file from storage. He spread photographs across his desk, kitchen sink, back door, yard. Something tugged at him as he studied an old image of the side garden. The flower bed had once been rectangular, neat, bordered by stones. In a new photo taken during Hale's property purchase, the stones were gone. The soil looked darker in one section, as though it had been disturbed long ago and settled differently. Avery drove back out without calling ahead. Hale was in the yard, kneeling beside the garden, hands in the dirt. "Planting something?" Avery asked. Hale looked up calmly. "Restoring," he corrected. "The previous owners let it decay." Avery scanned the soil. It appeared freshly turned, though the edges of the patch suggested older disruption beneath. "Mind if I take a look around?" Avery asked. Hale stood slowly. "Do you have a warrant?" The question hung between them. Avery did not. He studied Hale's face for flickers of fear or irritation. There were none, only patience. "Just routine," Avery said. Hale smiled faintly. "Of course." Inside, the house felt too clean, too intentional, as if it were staged for someone else's inspection. Avery moved room to room, noting the lack of personal items, no mail stacked on counters, no framed photos. The basement door stood at the end of the slightly. The basement smelled faintly of damp concrete. A single bulb illuminated the space. The floor was bare except for a workbench and a metal shovel leaning against the wall. The blade was clean. Too clean. Avery crouched, running his fingers along the concrete floor. Near the far wall, he noticed a faint hairline crack, forming a rough square shape, as if a section had once been cut and resealed. "You do any work down here?" Avery asked. "Just cleaning," Hale replied from the stairs. "This house deserves care." Avery stood. The crack nagged at him. "Mind if we bring in a forensic team? Just to close the old file?" Hale's eyes held steady. "If you believe that's necessary." The warrant came 2 days later. By then, half the town had heard whispers of excavation. Forensic technicians pried up the square of concrete in the basement. Dust filled the air. Hale watched from the corner, hands clasped behind his back. Beneath the slab lay soil, darker than the surrounding earth, recently disturbed. The technicians began to dig. The first strike revealed nothing. The second uncovered fabric. The third exposed bone. Mrs. Henley watched from her porch as 2 officers carried a black bag up from the basement steps. She pressed her hand to her mouth, though she had known, somewhere deep down she had known, since the lights came back on. Sheriff Avery stood over the excavation site long after the others left. The remains were partial, but enough for identification. Dental records would confirm it officially, but Avery already felt certain. Daniel Cresswell had never left his house. He had been beneath it all along. Hale did not resist arrest. As Avery placed the cuffs around his wrists, he asked the question that had gnawed at him. "Why buy the house?" Hale tilted his head slightly. "I didn't," he said softly. "Not really." Avery frowned. "Then why?" Hale's faint smile returned. "Because no one looks for what's already been found." The statement made no sense until 3 days later when the lab results returned. The remains in the basement were not Daniel Cresswell. Dental records did not match. The bones were older, at least 20 years. The Cresswell file reopened fully. Avery dug deeper into property records and uncovered something buried in paperwork. Before the Cresswells, the house had belonged to a man named Arthur Hale, Thomas Hale's father. Arthur Hale had reported his own brother missing in 1996. The case had gone cold within months. No body, no charges. Arthur sold the house 5 years later. The timeline settled into place like teeth in a trap. Thomas had grown up in that house. He had known its foundation, its weaknesses, its secrets. Avery visited Thomas in his holding cell. "The body wasn't Cresswell," Avery said. Thomas nodded once. "No, it was your uncle." Another nod. "Yes." Avery leaned closer. "Where is Daniel Cresswell?" For the first time, something shifted in Thomas's expression. Not fear, not regret. Something closer to amusement. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "you're still digging in the wrong place." Avery felt the ground tilt beneath him. That night, he returned alone to Briar Hollow Road. He walked the yard slowly, flashlight cutting through darkness. The garden patch lay exposed from the earlier dig, soil scattered. But something beyond it caught his eye. The old well near the tree line. It had been sealed decades ago, filled and capped with heavy stones. Avery approached, brushing leaves aside. One of the stones sat slightly askew, as though moved recently. His pulse quickened. Backup arrived 20 minutes later. They Avery shifted the stones and peered into the darkness below. The smell rose first, then the truth. Daniel Cresswell had been placed in the well 9 years ago, weighted down, hidden in plain sight. The basement grave had been older, unrelated, a relic of a different crime. Thomas Hale had returned not to conceal his uncle's body, but to retrieve it. He had planned to move the remains before anyone thought to look beneath the foundation. But the digging had drawn attention too soon. In the end, it wasn't brilliance that exposed him. It was noise, a shovel striking dirt in the quiet hours of morning. Briar Hollow Road returned to silence after the arrest. The house emptied once more, windows dark, porch swings still. 6 houses lined the curve of asphalt again, and at the end stood a reminder that some places do not forget what they are built upon. Sheriff Avery closed both case files within the month. Yet some nights, when the wind shifts just right, he wakes at 3:17 a.m., certain he hears it again. Metal biting into earth, slow, patient, waiting. Briar Hollow Road should have felt lighter after the arrests. 2 bodies recovered, 2 families given answers, headlines printed, statements made. But relief never quite settled over Alders Ridge. It hovered instead, thin and uncertain, like mist that never fully burns away. The Cresswell house stood empty again. Evidence tape snapped in the wind for a week before someone finally removed it. Sheriff Colin Avery told himself the unease was just residue, the kind that clings after a long investigation. But 3 nights after the well was opened, he woke again at 3:17 a.m. The sound was unmistakable this time. Not digging, not metal. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching across gravel. He sat upright, listening hard. His house sat miles from Briar Hollow. There was no gravel near his property. The sound continued for 5 measured steps, then stopped directly beneath his bedroom window. Avery reached for the lamp and switched it on. Silence. He rose, crossed the room, and pulled back the curtain. The yard lay empty under the porch light. No footprints, no movement. Only his own reflection staring back at him in the glass. By morning, he almost convinced himself it had been a dream, until Mrs. Henley called. "Sheriff," she whispered, her voice thinner than usual. He was back. Avery didn't ask who. "Thomas, I saw him," she said, "standing by the well, just standing there. I blinked and he was gone. Mrs. Henley, Hale is in county lockup." "Then someone who looks just like him," she insisted. "Same posture, same stillness." Avery drove out immediately. The well remained sealed with fresh boards and police markings. The yard was undisturbed. Mrs. Henley swore she had seen a figure at 3:17 a.m. exactly. Avery noted the time carefully. That number again. At the station, he pulled Thomas Hale's visitation log. No visitors. No unusual behavior reported by guards. Hale had spoken little since his arrest. Ate normally. Slept through the night according to checks. Avery requested the overnight surveillance footage from the holding corridor. He watched the timestamp roll to 3:16 a.m. Thomas lay on his bunk, eyes closed. At 3:17, the overhead lights flickered once, just a stutter, a glitch in old wiring perhaps. But in that half-second distortion, the camera image blurred. When clarity returned, Thomas was sitting upright on his bunk, not groggy, not confused, just sitting, eyes open, staring directly at the camera. Avery felt a chill travel up his spine. The guard's report mentioned no disturbances, no flickering lights, no inmate movement. footage, Thomas remained sitting for exactly 1 minute. At 3:18, he lay back down and closed his eyes. Avery rewound the clip, watched it again. The flicker felt wrong, too precise. That afternoon, he visited Thomas in the interrogation room. "Sleep well?" Avery asked casually. Thomas tilted his head. "As well as one can in a cage. You sit up around 3:17 most nights." A faint smile. "Time is interesting, Sheriff. It repeats itself in certain places." "What does that mean?" Thomas leaned forward slightly. "You ever wonder why your witness woke at that exact minute when she heard digging?" Avery's jaw tightened. "You were digging?" "Yes," Thomas admitted calmly. "But not every night she heard it." Silence stretched. "What are you implying?" Avery asked. Thomas's eyes sharpened. "Houses remember. Foundations hold impressions. Violence leaves echoes." Avery stood abruptly. "You're trying to unsettle me." "No," Thomas said softly. "I'm warning you." Avery left without another word. That evening he pulled archived files on the property. Before Arthur Hale, before the Cresswells, the land record stretched back nearly a century. In 1928, a farmhouse had stood on the same foundation footprint. It burned down in winter. Official cause, faulty stove. Casualties, one occupant unaccounted for. Body never recovered. Avery leaned back slowly in his chair. A missing man in 1928, another in 1996, Daniel Cresswell in 2017. 3 disappearances tied to the same soil. At 3:17 a.m., Avery sat awake intentionally, waiting. The clock ticked louder than usual. At exactly 3:17, his phone vibrated. A call from dispatch. "Sheriff," the night operator said, breathless. "We've got a situation at Briar Hollow." Avery was already moving. Blue lights washed across tree trunks as he approached the Cresswell house. The front door stood open. Mrs. Henley and 2 neighbors clustered near the road, pale and shaking. "It's inside," one of them muttered. Avery drew his weapon and stepped through the doorway. The air felt colder than outside. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. He moved room to room until he reached the basement door. It stood ajar. A faint scraping sound drifted upward. Metal against concrete. Avery descended slowly. The single bulb swung gently overhead, though no wind stirred. On the basement floor, near the square they had excavated days earlier, lay a shovel. Moving, not by much. Just a subtle tremor, as if something beneath the soil shifted. Avery stepped closer. The tremor stopped. Silence swallowed the room. He crouched and pressed his palm against the exposed dirt. It felt warm, warmer than it should. The sensation vanished instantly. "Sheriff," a deputy called from upstairs. Avery stood unsettled. "Probably settling," he muttered, though he didn't believe it. The next morning, the county announced plans to demolish the house. Too much history, too much liability. Avery didn't argue. Demolition began 3 days later. Excavators tore into wood and plaster. Walls collapsed inward. The porch swings splintered beneath heavy machinery. Neighbors watched from a safe distance. At 3:17 p.m., as the foundation was cracked open, a worker shouted. Machinery halted. Avery approached the exposed earth cautiously. Beneath layers of soil, beyond the square where Arthur's brother had been buried, lay something older. Bones, several sets, tangled together. No coffins, no markers, just remains layered like sediment. Avery felt the weight of decades pressing upward from the ground. Forensics later confirmed at least 5 individuals. Different eras, different causes of death. None officially reported. wasn't a single crime scene. It was a pattern, a magnet. Something about that land drew violence to it, or concealed it too well. That night, Avery returned to the jail. He placed photographs of the newly discovered remains on the table in front of Thomas Hale. For the first time, Thomas's composure faltered. Not fear, recognition. "You didn't know," Avery realized aloud. Thomas studied the photos carefully. "No," he said quietly. "I only knew about my uncle." "Then why return?" Avery pressed. Thomas hesitated. His voice dropped. "Because when I was a boy, I heard digging every night at 317. My father told me it was pipes or animals. But the sound came from below, from under my bed." Avery's pulse slowed. And sometimes," Thomas continued, "I would wake up already standing." Silence filled the room. "Standing where?" Avery asked. Thomas met his gaze steadily. "In the yard." The air felt thinner. "Are you saying you killed Cresswell?" Thomas's expression hardened. "No, I'm saying the house never liked it." Avery slammed his hand on the table. "That's enough." But doubt crept into him like cold water through cracked stone. Over the next week, demolition continued until nothing remained but a scar of churned earth. The county decided not to rebuild. The lot would remain empty. A small fenced patch of land at the end of a quiet road. Mrs. Henley said she finally slept through the night after the foundation was removed. No more sounds, no more shadows near the well. Avery almost believed it was over, until the night he woke again at 317. No footsteps this time, no digging, just silence so heavy it pressed against his ears. He sat upright slowly. Something felt different, wrong. He turned toward the bedroom door. It was open. He always closed it before bed. Avery rose cautiously. The hallway stretched empty. The house still. He stepped toward the front window and looked out at his yard. At the far edge, near the tree line, a patch of earth looked darker than the rest. Freshly disturbed. His breath caught. He didn't own a shovel. He hadn't dug anything. Yet the soil near the trees appeared turned. Slow, rhythmic, as if something beneath had shifted upward. Avery stood frozen as a faint indentation formed in the dirt. Not from above, from below. The soil rose slightly, then settled. Rose again, like something pressing gently upward. Testing. He felt it then, the same warmth he'd felt in the Cresswell basement. Traveling through the ground, through foundations, through time. At exactly 3:18 a.m., the movement stopped. The yard returned to stillness. Avery did not sleep again that night. By morning, the soil looked ordinary, undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. He drove to Briar Hollow Road before sunrise. The empty lot lay quiet beneath frost. No house, no well, just open ground. For the first time in years, there was nothing built atop it. Avery stepped through the gate and stood at the center of the scarred earth. The wind moved softly through trees. At 3:17 p.m., standing there in daylight, he felt a vibration beneath his boots. Faint, almost imagined. A slow, patient pulse, waiting for something to be built again. Waiting for walls. Waiting for weight. Avery understood then that some places are not haunted by spirits. They are hungry for structure, for secrecy, for the shelter a house provides. Remove the walls, and the ground grows restless. That evening, he filed a recommendation with the county, permanent memorial park designation. No future construction permitted. The request was approved within the month. Grass was planted. very still in the dark, listening, not for digging, not for footsteps, but for the subtle sound of soil shifting somewhere far away, as if searching for walls again.